Poverty surrounds us wherever we go, even if it might not seem like it. According to the United Census Bureau, there are approximately 37.2 million people living in poverty in the United States alone. If you wish to put that into perspective for the whole country, it marks up to about 11.4% of the population. When poverty is usually discussed, the first thought that crosses most people's minds are those who are unfortunate enough to be in the streets. However, that is only one form of poverty that exists amongst the 6 different types of poverty. Luckily, there are plenty of people around who know the study of the topic, such as Robert Edelman, Robert Wagmiller, and Dr. Kenya Wolf. So there is plenty of information floating around about this certain topic. Since not many people know that there are many different forms of poverty that exist in the world, I chose to discuss and analyze all 6 types of poverty that are just as prevalent in the world: situational, generational, absolute, relative, rural, and urban poverty. The first type of poverty is called situational poverty. Situational poverty is caused by sudden unfortunate events in a person's life, such as divorce and job loss. Sometimes it can even be caused by natural disasters such as tornadoes, hurricanes, and massive floods. However, it is different from the other types of poverty on this list in that it is typically a temporary form of poverty and can be resolved a bit easier than other kinds. Once the unfortunate event passes, a person can return to their normal lives with relative ease, though they might need some assistance from insurance companies and governmental aid. On the topic of a normal life, a portion of those in poverty might see being impoverished as a normal day in life. These people are in a type of poverty called generational poverty. Generational poverty, as you might assume, is when a person is impoverished across multiple generations. In order to be classified as being in generational poverty, at least 2 generations of a family must be in poverty. Ironically, it is also one of the hardest types of poverty to escape. As people grow up and live with limited resources, they grow used to that day of life. According to Robert Wagmiller and Robert Edelman, 2 people who work alongside the National Center for Children in Poverty, the negative effects of deprivation on human development tend to accumulate. Individuals with greater exposure to poverty during childhood are likely to have more difficulty escaping poverty as adults. Absolute poverty is a state of poverty that most people think about. People who are in absolute poverty are unable to get a hold of essential needs such as housing and food. This is also known as deep poverty or destitution. This is one of the most dangerous types of poverty because the person's basic needs cannot be met. That is the reason why it is also one of the most well-known types of poverty, since you can visibly see these people living in a state of poverty. Unlike the other types of poverty, the criteria of being in destitution is not changed by economic growth. The reason why this is because if someone cannot afford basic necessities, it will not change the economic if the economy skyrockets or plummets. Relative poverty is essentially the opposite of absolute poverty. Relative poverty is when an individual is living off of an income that is 50% or below average income for a single person or family. Essentially, they are living paycheck to paycheck with little to no money left to spend on anything unessential. While people in relative poverty are able to get their basic needs and live moderately decent lives, they are still considered to be in poverty because they make less than what is considered a livable wage. What is also interesting about this type of poverty is that the criteria does not change with the economy. The reason why I consider it the opposite of absolute poverty is because depending on if the economy crashes or is flourishing, a person can be considered living a normal life and having an average amount of income, or be considered impoverished. Now, these next 2 types of poverty both deal with the environment a person lives in, so I'll be discussing them together. These 2 poverties are called rural and urban poverty. Rural poverty is quite different than urban poverty because it tends to be a lot harder to get a hold of certain things in the countryside. An example of this could be technology or access to the internet. A professor in early childhood education named Dr. Kenya Wolf saw this problem firsthand in a rural hometown when the pandemic first struck. Wolf stated that when the pandemic took children out of schools, I would see parents lined up at the schools picking up giant packets of worksheets for 4- and 5-year-olds. As for urban poverty, getting a hold of internet access isn't something that's a huge problem. Most libraries have some sort of internet access that is readily available to the public. Some examples of urban poverty could be overcrowding and structural issues. If you visit big cities, you can see this quite frequently with the crumbling abandoned buildings and the amount of people that crowd the suburbs of these places. Now that all the types of poverty have been discussed, it is easy to see the differences between each type. Some types are temporary, like situational poverty, while others can last for generations, generational poverty. Some can be less severe than others, like relative poverty, but they're still not so great places to be in. Absolute poverty and the environmental types of poverty are the most visible forms of poverty, thus making them the most types of poverty that are, most well known. The accounts and studies of Wagmiller, Edelman, and Wolf also helped us get an idea of what these people are going through so we can better understand their situation. Overall, it is incredibly important that others know the different types of poverty so that we can recognize the types of poverty we encounter. Just like puzzle pieces, the 6 different types of poverty are used to build up the entire big picture of what poverty entails.